I can't stress to you how much I'm concerned about the level of control from our government. Our government so far have underhandedly and backhandedly tried to bring in certain things that they haven't consulted us about at all. Digital ID, that successfully got put on the back burner for now, but is being brought to us through various other means. And facial recognition technology, that goes for debate tomorrow. So the facial recognition technology is being debated at the Home Office at the moment. Another measure that was being brought in has been brought in, it's in towns and cities, that we weren't consulted about and we're not very happy about, another control mechanism. CBDCs, that will be the next. They are trying to do away with cash, and CBDC is a way to control what you can spend, where you can spend it, and how you can spend it. We know that the government have taken it upon themselves to, we're going to scrap jury trials. And I brought that information to you last week about the jury trials. And the scrapping of the jury trials is so us commoners, if we end up in court, won't actually have a jury of our peers to look at our case and to basically say whether we're guilty or innocent. We won't have a jury of our peers. It will be some geezer in his robes that will decide, who has absolutely no idea of your circumstance. So that's another level of control that they're trying to put onto us. And all these things are happening as a form of controlling us in some way, shape or form. And the jury trials, we did the research last week, that's been part of our culture from way, way, way back. And the latest thing that they are trying to control is our right to protest. So let me show you what I'm talking about. This is the post that I saw this week that I'm going to do some research with you now on. So this is the post that disturbed me initially. Public meeting, defend the right to protest. Now this is being brought to us by Palestine Solidarity Campaign. So Thursday the 12th of February, so that will be tomorrow. PSC Director Ben Jamal and Stop the Wars Chris Nynam, charged for peacefully protesting genocide, are facing trial next month, just as the government's legislation further restricting the right to protest nears becoming law. Now, I wasn't aware of this. Join us on the 12th of February in central London to hear from them and others about how we can defend our right to protest. And you can get a free ticket. I mean, by the time this goes out, this will have passed already, so I'll be able to bring you more information on it. But I'm very concerned about government's legislation restricting the right to protest. They don't want us to have our voice anymore. And protest has been part of our culture probably for as long as jury trials. But yet again, they're just going to change the legislation so that you now cannot protest. You cannot protest peacefully, non-peacefully. And protest is one of the avenues that's open to us as citizens to show how many of us disagree with the powers that ought not to be. And they want to do away with it. Of course they want to do away with it. They don't want to hear us. We put them where they are, but they don't want to hear from us. That's as far as our input goes. You elect us, but we don't want to know what you want. Like, don't forget all of the things that Starmer got elected on, all the things he said he was going to do, he didn't. We elected him on those. Now, if we had the Welsh covenant of MPs cannot lie, otherwise they'll be stripped of their position, then he would be stripped of his position already and he wouldn't be our Prime Minister. So that's what they're trying to do. So we're going to investigate this. I also found Liberty, which is a post that went up on the 7th, so 4 days ago. Protest is not a privilege, it's our fundamental right. But the government's crime and policing bill will give police powers to shut down protests and criminalise people for taking to the streets. I'm just going to, it's only 16 seconds. It's not a long, but it just gives you the history. History proves that when we come together, we can achieve positive change. And that's why they want to stop it. Because when we come together, we can achieve positive change. They don't want us to come together. They don't want to have our kind of positive change. They want to bring in backhanded change that we don't get consulted about. They want to bring in things that they've never even, it's not even part of their mandate when they were being elected. That's what they want to do. They being the overlords. So the Crime and Policing Bill 2025, over the last 14 years, community policing has been downgraded, with neighbourhood officers pulled off the beat to fill shortages elsewhere, weakening connections with the community they serve. Trust in the police has been undermined by failures in vetting and the appalling misconduct of some officers. Powers to combat antisocial behaviour and shoplifting have been weakened, leaving our town centres exposed. The justice system has been allowed to grind to a halt. That is why the government is introducing the Crime and Policing Bill. Evidently, to tackle the epidemic of serious violence and violence against women and girls that stains our society, equip police with the powers they need to combat antisocial behaviour, crime and terrorism. Okay, well, evidently the bill was to support the government's Safer Streets mission, to halve knife crime and violence against women and girls in a decade and rebuild public confidence in policing and in the criminal justice system. We discussed, when it came to the juries being taken away, we discussed last week that the shortages are coming from government underfunding. Neighbourhood officers pulled off the beat to fill shortages elsewhere. And now with this facial recognition technology, obviously, that is taking more police for shortages elsewhere. That's how it was sold to us, that, it would relieve the pressure on the police. Well, how about funding them? How about giving them more money to relieve the pressure on the police? Because I would say that neighbourhood police officers are being downgraded, community police being downgraded, is abysmal. There is nothing more of a deterrent than having a policeman wandering around the streets. People are going to be less likely to commit crime if they know that they could bump into a couple of bobbies. We used to call them bobbies on the street. The current version of the bill has not finished its final reading in the House of Lords. So it's been through first, second, committee stage, report stage in the House of Commons. And this is the key at the bottom here. It's been the first, second, third reading at the House of Lords. Sorry, not the third reading. First and second, the committee stage and the report stage. However, it is interesting that it hasn't gone for the third reading in the House of Lords, hasn't been taken to the final stage, consideration of amendments and royal assent. So it must be because of this stage here that they are trying to do away with our right to protest, because it hasn't been finalised. It hasn't been passed through. It hasn't been passed, so we can still have our say on it. And it originated in the House of Commons in 2024. So the latest news: crime and policing bill line by line examination of the bill continued during the final day of committee stage on February the 5th. Report stage: a further chance to amend the bill and make changes is scheduled to begin on the 25th of February. Those are the stages. So we're at the report stage. It's been with the House of Lords since the 10th of November last year. We still have the ability as people, as general citizens, to have our say and shout about it. But we've got to be quick. We have to be quick. Tell me about the new provisions being made to the bill regarding right to protest. The Crime and Policing Bill introduces significant new public order powers that directly affect how protests can be conducted in the UK. These provisions extend... We'll start that again. These provisions expand police authority and create new offences aimed at what the government described as dangerous or highly disruptive protest tactics. So, new police powers to address disorderly behaviour at protests. The government states that it will support peaceful protests, but has seen a rise in tactics it considers dangerous or excessively disruptive. As a result, the bill gives police new powers to stop specific behaviour, including misuse of flares and fireworks at protests, climbing on war memorials, concealing identity using face coverings to avoid liability. These measures are framed as closing gaps in public order law. Further restrictions. Independent analysis highlight that the bill continues a trend of restricting protest rights, building on earlier laws such as Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act and Public Order Act 2023. These earlier acts broadened the definition of serious disruption and expanded police powers. The new bill extends these restrictions even further, according to civil society observers. New criminal offences targeting protest tactics. Human rights groups warn that the bill criminalises additional forms of peaceful protest, including the use of face coverings, gives police the power to order people on limited visas to leave the country if involved in certain protest-related offences. Amnesty International describes the bill as yet another assault on the right to peacefully protest. The broader public order framework. The bill's long title includes explicit provision for public order, signalling that protest-related measures are a core part of the legislation. So what this means: more police discretion. More police discretion. Officers will have broader authority to intervene earlier in protests, particularly where they believe disruption or danger may occur. Not is occurring, may occur. New offences for specific protest behaviours. Actions previously considered minor or tolerated may now carry criminal penalties. Increased legal risk for protesters. Face coverings, certain equipment, or particular protest tactics may now lead to arrest or removal. Continuation of a multi-year tightening of protest law. This bill builds on a legislative trend that has steadily expanded police powers over protests since 2022. Wow. So on a positive note, if there's any positives to be found, They're not saying that you can't protest. They're saying that you can protest. So we can still go and gather together and make our voices known. But it sounds like they're going to have to be silent protests. It sounds like you're going to have to make sure you're not covered at all, facially, not got your identity masked in any way, shape, or form. And yeah, you're not being highly disruptive or dangerous. But they're saying that they can enforce powers if they think you may become dangerous and highly disruptive. Not that you are. If you are being dangerous or highly disruptive, then fair enough. Get you taken away, because that's deterring from the point you're trying to make. But that you may become dangerous or highly disruptive, it's a bit subjective when it comes to policing. And we know from the protests, the peaceful protests at the prison, that the police actually made the whole situation much, much worse. Okay. Now, I'm now going to ask Claude. So tell me the history of protesting in the UK back to its earliest record. Here we go. So medieval and early modern period, so pre-1600s, the earliest recorded protests in Britain include the Peasants' Revolt in 1381, one of the most significant early uprisings triggered by the poll tax and serfdom. Led by Wat Tyler and John Ball, tens of thousands of peasants marched on London, demanding an end to serfdom and fairer taxation. Though ultimately suppressed, it demonstrated organised popular resistance. So it was suppressed, but I mean that they were classed as peasants now. I'm sure they sit in their ivory towers classing us UK citizens, us general public, as peasants. The Pilgrimage of Grace, a massive uprising in northern England against Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries and religious reforms. Up to 40,000 people participated in this religiously motivated protest. So that was 1536 to 1537. So we've got quite a long history of protesting in this country. And I bet none of those were nice and peaceful. 17th century, so revolutionary period, English Civil War era, English Civil War era, 1642 to 1651. While a full civil war, it emerged from protests and conflicts over royal power, religion, and parliamentary rights. The Levellers movement, 1640 to 1650s, a political movement demanding extended suffrage, religious tolerance and equality before the law, pioneering concepts of democratic rights. So that was the 17th century. The 18th century, the early industrial protests, Gordon riots, 1780, anti-Catholic protests in London that turned into some of the most destructive riots in British history. The Luddite protests, 1811 to 1816, textile workers destroyed machinery they believed threatened their livelihoods during the Industrial Revolution. The 19th century reform and labour movements. Peterloo Massacre, 1819, around 60,000 people gathered in Manchester demanding parliamentary reform. Cavalry charged the crowd, killing 15 and injuring hundreds, a watershed moment that galvanised the reform movement. The Chartist movement, 1838 to 1857, a working class movement demanding political reforms including universal male suffrage, secret ballots and payment for MPs. They organised mass meetings, petitions with millions of signatures and occasional uprisings. The Reform Act protests, various demonstrations throughout the centuries pushed for expanding voting rights, culminating in the Reform Acts of 1832, 1867 and 1884. The Match Girls Strike. Female workers at a match factory struck against poor conditions, marking an important moment in labour and women's rights. That was in 1888. Now we're into the early 20th century. So our history of being able to protest and having our voices heard dates way back. The suffrage movement, 1903 to 1918, Women's Social and Political Union, led by Emmeline Pankhurst, and used increasingly militant tactics, including arson, window smashing, and hunger strikes to demand women voting rights. The General Strike, 1926, over 1.7 million workers struck in support of coal miners, paralysing the country for 9 days. Like, heaven forbid that we should actually know our history of protesting and see the differences that it made over time. This is what our government would like you to stop doing. Post-World War II era. Campaign for nuclear disarmament, 1958 to the present. Beginning with the Aldermaston marches, CND organised massive protests against nuclear weapons, and they are still doing it. The anti-Vietnam War protests, 1960s to the 1970s, large demonstrations against American involvement in Vietnam. Miners' strikes, 1984 to 85, a bitter year-long strike against pit closures that became a defining conflict of the Thatcher era. And the modern era. So this is more recent. So we've had the history. Let's have a look. Right back to pre-1600s. Now we're bringing it right up to the modern era. Poll tax riots. Massive protests against Margaret Thatcher's community charge, culminating in violent riots in London that contributed to her resignation. Countryside Alliance March, 1998 and 2002. Hundreds of thousands protested against hunting bans and rural policy. Stop the War Coalition, an estimated 1 to 2 million people marched in London against the Iraq War, possibly the largest protest in British history. Didn't get us very far, though. Student protests, 2010. Demonstration against tuition fee increases and education cuts. Extinction Rebellion and climate protests, 2018 to present. Civil disobedience campaigns demanding action on climate change. Black Lives Matter 2020, widespread protests following George Floyd's death, addressing racism and police conduct. Insulate Britain and Just Stop Oil 2021 to present, disruptive protests using road blockages to demand climate action. So the common threads. Throughout British history, protests have evolved from spontaneous uprisings to organised movements, addressing issues from taxation and political representation to workers' rights, social justice and environmental concerns. The right to peacefully protest has gradually become recognised as fundamental to British democracy, though tensions between protesters and authorities continue to shape the boundaries of acceptable dissent. So that's the history of us protesting as peasants, us peasants protesting in our country. And it dates back pre-1600s. And it's very telling when you think, in order to actually be heard, we have to resort to protesting. We place these people into the positions that they're in, but in order for them to take any bloody notice of anything we have to say, if we all come together and protest, then something gets done. We actually have a voice. And with the current government, as it stands at the moment, who have not stood by any of the things they said they were going to do, and have implemented things that they didn't even mention when they were standing for election, and now going about trying to curb our ability to pull them up on it and tell them that the job they're doing just really isn't good enough. And our right to protest is under threat here. And I'll make no bones about it. They're not saying we can't protest. When I initially read that very first tweet on X, I thought they were trying to take away our right to protest completely. But when it comes to the police bill that they're putting through, they are going to make it much more difficult for you to have your say in the form of protesting anything that they're doing that we're unhappy about. This needs to change. There needs to be an ability of our government to listen to the citizens that put them in the positions they're in. So we can protest, be it peacefully. So none of the history that we've already read up about. We need to have the ability to protest. And they can't take that away based on the history that we've just looked at, because that's insane. That's absolute insanity. It's not quite as disturbing as I thought it would be. We are not having our right to protest taken away completely, but our right to protest is going to be controlled by part of the new policing bill that is still passing through the House of Lords at the moment. So it's not as dire as initially thought. They're more looking at police powers and looking at us being able to protest in a peaceful way rather than anything else.